I'd like to draw your attention this morning back to the Beatitudes, Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, and we're going to look at verse number 6 this morning. Matthew chapter 5 and verse number 6. Maybe I could kind of begin with a question before we get into the reading this morning. We'll go like this, and you could ask it a variety of ways, I suppose, but if you were offered anything that you wanted most, you could have anything, what would it be? What would you ask for? Sometimes I've thought about that as it relates to, the genie in a bottle or something, and I probably would ask for an extra 3 wishes or something with one of mine. But maybe that's too greedy. But anyway, sometimes we may begin to think, well, I'd like to have health, maybe, if you've been struggling with that, or luxury, prestige, maybe, power, authority, that kind of thing. In all honesty, though, maybe what we could just ask ourselves this morning, again, just trying to be as honest as we know how, would we really ask for more of God? If I gave you anything you wanted, not that I certainly have any ability for that, but if you could ask anything you wanted, would you ask for more of God? That's kind of our question here this morning. We find it in Matthew chapter 5 and verse number 6. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. There's the promise there that they will be filled, they shall be filled. But there's the condition here as well that it requires us to hunger and thirst after righteousness. And really, sometimes we have to ask ourselves, am I really that serious about seeking after God? Am I really wanting Him more than anything else? One of the most important evidences of revival fires burning is that God's people begin to long for Him. And maybe even we would go so far as to say, would go beyond the call of duty, quote unquote. Obviously, whatever it takes to get God's presence is worth it. But in a sense, we might think of it as going beyond the call of duty to seek after God. We think of the different revivals that have taken place, and God moved because men or women even were able to really get serious about seeking after God. Really getting serious about longing for Him. Hungering and thirsting, as our text would say here today. Those kinds of desires may seem a little more likely during camp meeting, so we just came through several of them. Maybe at revival time. Sometimes it can almost seem a little bit abnormal to even church people for us to really hunger and thirst for righteousness. It's almost like, well, don't go off the deep end. Don't get off into some cult somehow. I mean, you don't really have to go that far. That's kind of the mindset many times. And really, no matter what anybody else thinks, that ought to be the heart cry for us is, Lord, give me a hunger and thirst for righteousness. And not just give me the hunger and thirst. Really, I think that's maybe the place to start. Lord, stir it up somehow in me, but also then reward that hunger and thirst as well. And so this morning, I might ask you, is there a hunger and thirst for His fullness? Are you really longing for Him? Read a story, I believe I read it, I'm sure I must have, that there was these boats down in the South Atlantic Ocean. I think it happened numbers of times, but kind of referring to one particular time. In this particular case, there were sailors in those ancient times that they would get down there. Of course, probably many of you would know, you're not supposed to drink the ocean water. You may get so thirsty, but you're not supposed to drink that because that salt content and everything, that actually does more damage than good. And so they're down there. They're perishing with thirst. They're longing for a drink, just something, even a small drink, I'm sure. In those moments, of course, in those old days, maybe they would have sailed mostly. And so they're down there, just no wind, seemingly, in that particular location. And they were ready to perish for lack of water in that windless, expansive ocean. sort of, maybe we would even say adrift, helpless. It's about the way they were because of the lack of wind. But as the story would go, sometimes maybe another ship would come by. The sailors might ask, what's the trouble? What's going on? Maybe they had a flag of some sort, and trying to attract attention. Please help us, help us. And the sailors responded that they were dying of thirst. And when they heard that, the other sailors from this other boat said, just lower your buckets. Just lower your buckets. You're in the mouth of the mighty Amazon River. And I've read that the Amazon River actually can be detected as much as 200 miles from the mainland as it rushes out there into the ocean and kind of pushes the salt water back, so that they would have had actually good water. But you see, it took with all of the fresh water around them, it took someone to tell them there is hope. All you have to do is lower your bucket. Now, that example or that little illustration is just simply to tell us this morning that we have a hope. When we get thirsty, when we're longing for something to satisfy, there's plenty of God's provision for that. All we have to do, and if men are speaking, if I could say it that way, is lower our buckets. There's no need to perish. There's no need to die of thirst when He's right there to satisfy. And so this morning, as we look at this, I've called it the urgency God blesses, as we're of course talking about the Beatitudes, the blessings here. The urgency God blesses. I want us to really recognize the need for urgency in our own souls. The common problem seems to be that we don't really like the idea of missing out on God's presence, but we don't really long for it. We don't want Him to go away. We don't want Him to leave us behind. We don't want to worship week in and week out, maybe without at least some sense that God's here, and yet we don't really long for it sometimes. We want God's blessing, but we don't like the sacrifice it takes. We don't like to have to do what it requires. We don't truly feel the urgency as though we were starving or dying of thirst, as I mentioned with the sailors there. And so this morning, let's just notice briefly the need for this godly hunger and thirst and the promised filling that Jesus gives here. The first, actually, it's just 3 questions I have for you today. Number 1, are you satisfied? Are you satisfied? If we begin at the end of the verse, we see that God's promise to the earnest heart here is wonderful. They shall be filled. And so when you begin to look at what He's saying, if we know God's not going to lie, we know that His promises are true, and so if we hunger and thirst, we will be filled. And so maybe the question this morning is, are you satisfied? If you're not satisfied, then it probably goes back to the beginning of the verse saying, well, have you been longing for it? If we are just content to go along, kind of going through the motions and not really having much satisfaction in our walk with God, then that's probably what we'll experience. And go back to the song there, kind of the example, the illustration from Jesus' parable of the prodigal son. And all my life long I had panted for that draught or drink, depending which book you use, from some cool spring, that I hope would quench the burning of the thirst I felt within, I believe is the words there. And of course, eventually it goes into the chorus, hallelujah, I have found it, found him, whom my soul so long has craved. Jesus satisfies my longings. Through His blood I now am saved. It may be easiest to evaluate the first part of the verse here. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, based on what the results have been. Do I measure up to the first part because I've experienced the second part? Do you follow what I'm saying? I hope you understand there. He promised it. He said, if we hunger and thirst, we shall be filled. And so, are you satisfied? Or does it indicate that maybe there's something deep down inside? Maybe you're troubled inside, thirsting for more. Nobody else sees it. Nobody else notices. You may paste a smile on your face. Everything looks good. You're in church every week. You're trying to seek after God, at least outwardly. But if there's something troubling you on the inside and you're not satisfied with your walk with God, then maybe you need to get back to the first part and say, oh Lord, stir that longing in me. So, that brings me to the next question. The first one is, are you satisfied? The second one is, are you seeking? Are you seeking for anything more? You know, if we really truly hunger and thirst after righteousness, we'll go seeking for it. We'll go the extra mile. We'll do what it requires. I know many times we're really not very hungry. Many times we just eat just because we like to or because it's about that time. Sometimes, every once in a while, we might get really, really thirsty. Depending on, if you've been out working or whatever, maybe you get to that state. And sometimes you might be just about ready to look for anything. Maybe you'd go a little bit out of your way to get it satisfied. Maybe you would even settle for something you normally wouldn't have. And of course, we don't want to apply that too much here in a spiritual sense. But, I'm talking about the desperation that we have. And so today I'd like to ask you, are you satisfied? And if you aren't, are you seeking? You see, we have to seek after Him. We have to long for Him. We need to get busy about seeking to have that hunger or thirst satisfied. We can wish, we can hope, we can dream, but those things don't bring victory until we really seek. I'm afraid sometimes we may, deep down inside, probably it's the attack of the enemy. Deep down inside, we kind of wish for something better. We wish things were a little different. We wish that maybe we'd be able to get kind of back on track. But if we don't seek it, we don't find it. And so we have to get to this place to actually be hungry and thirsty enough to seek. Now, of course, normally it's not fun to be hungry or thirsty. Unless you're ready to be satisfied. Maybe you're just pulling into a big buffet or something, that's fine. But I'm talking about when you don't, you're not able to get that need met right away. It doesn't seem like a very pleasant thing. But when we're hungry and thirsty after God, enough so that we will seek after Him, that is a good thing. It's a wonderful blessing. The concern is whether we've just gotten used to the way things have been. And so we're not really seeking. We're wishing, we're hoping, but we're not seeking. And so today, again, we go back to the question, are you satisfied? But then the question has to follow, are you seeking for something more? And seeking so that you will find. Sometimes I'm afraid what we get to is that we say a little prayer now and then. We kind of, Lord, please keep dealing with me. Keep helping me here. And we almost make it like a little token. We kind of throw up God's direction. And now, Lord, if I keep doing this, at least I know, you're not going to leave me. And eventually, after I've had my fill of everything else in this world, then I can come to you. And I've been kind of trying to stay close here. That's not what we're talking about. I mean a true hunger and thirst for Him. Are you seeking Him? All right, so again, we've dealt with the first question there, even in that thought there. Are you satisfied? The second question, are you seeking? And the third question brings us to this point, and of course we've already dealt with this a little bit as well, but are you serious? Are you serious? Now again, I want to follow up on that caution I was just giving you, because sometimes we can just get into a perpetual state of seeking. And that's not really what we're talking about. Again, I've already indicated sometime, I'm afraid what happens is that we almost think that the longer or at least the more we act like we're seeking, we sort of pull the wool over God's eyes almost. I don't know that, obviously we wouldn't probably say that, wouldn't be that honest maybe, but that's almost the way we think. Well, we'll just kind of pull the wool over God's eyes and He'll think that we're at least still serious and so, everything will be okay. It can be easy to get into a continual state of seeking. But if we're serious about it, He will be found. He will bless. He will fill us. But we have to be serious. We can't just mention our needs from time to time. We can't just have it on a list and, well, I've been praying about that, and I just simply say it off the list every week. Or maybe even every day. But where we really truly take it by the job, that might involve fasting. It might involve even an extra hour in prayer for that matter. But we're talking about if you're hungry and thirsty. We're talking about if you're serious and desperate. And so, again, we need to recognize that true hunger and thirst brings a desperation, an urgency to get results. We have to be serious about our seeking after God. And so this morning, I want us to think about this a little bit. How serious are you? How serious are you about really knowing the presence of God in your life? Oh, I know. We even have revival time. We have camp meeting time. Just came through that not long ago. So in all of this, the spiritual fervor, we may seek a little bit. We may, even go to special prayer times maybe. Revival time comes. We have special prayer. We recognize, okay, now I got to get serious again. But we need to be serious now. Hungering and thirsting for righteousness. They are the ones that will be filled. And so today I'm just going to kind of sum it up this way. How much are you really serious about seeking Him? Are you happy and contented with the same old experience with God? Or are you really hungering and thirsting for more? Are you really longing for Him to come with a fresh filling in your heart? Maybe you're longing for a clear conscience. And you just know you've been battled by the enemy so much. And you've given in over and over and over again. And you just wish things could be different. If you're hungry and thirsty, He'll meet your need. Maybe it's not necessarily in that area of the clear conscience per se, but maybe you've been kind of feeling like there's something more. Longing for the fullness of His presence in your life. Longing to be totally surrendered to Him. Knowing that He has filled you and is empowering you to do what He wants you to do day by day. Maybe it's that maybe you've been saved. You feel like even today that you're sanctified, and yet it's been a while since you really had that close connection with God. Maybe you feel like you have a need for revival of that special closeness. I'm here to tell you, if we hunger and thirst for it, if we mean business, God can and will fill us. And so today, it's up to you. Do you really long for Him? Are you hungry and thirsty for Him? If you are, you can be filled. If you're satisfied with just the status quo, the same old that you've had for so long, you're not really going to get anywhere. But if you'll seek after Him, if you'll hunger and thirst, He promises you shall be